Your new book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, just launched this week, and it's getting fantastic reception. Can you summarize for us the thesis of the book and how you arrived at it?
Yeah, so the idea of the book is that we live in a culture that is biased against a constellation of traits, namely shyness, seriousness, introversion. And that this leads to a colossal waste of talent and of energy and of happiness. And that introversion really does have all kinds of attributes to it, some real surprising powers to what it means to be an introvert. And yet this is not something we're mindful of. And instead what we do is we encourage introverts to act more like extroverts instead of acting like their best selves.
That's interesting. Can you explain for us briefly what the difference between an introvert and an extrovert is?
Yeah, good question. So introverts are people who like more quiet, less stimulating environments, whereas extroverts crave more stimulation to feel at their best. And this is an important thing to see because people often assume that being an introvert means being antisocial, but it's really not that at all. It's just differently social. So an introvert preferring less stimulation will often prefer to have, a glass of wine with a close friend as opposed to going to a loud party full of strangers.
Mm-hmm. And you say that this part of your personality may be as crucial as your gender and race. Why is that?
Yeah, because the question of what your orientation is, in general, are you oriented more towards the outer world or more towards the world of your own inner riches? That it's very profound, and it affects every day-to-day interaction in your life. It affects how you like to spend your time. It affects you in similar ways to the way gender does in terms of it shaping your life.
And if there really is a bias against introverts, then that's a bias against almost half our population.
Yes, and this is another way in which there's a parallel to gender. I often say that the place of introverts in our culture today is very similar to where women were around the 50s or the early 1960s. It was half the population. It was a piece of the population that was discounted because of something that went to the core of who they were. And I will also say it was a part of the population that was on the verge of coming into its own. And I believe that's what's happening with introverts now. I think we're at the cusp of a real sea change in the way we understand this personality type.
And do you think that now in workplaces and in society in general, we're mistaking the person with the loudest voice and maybe the person with charisma as a good leader?
Oh yeah, yes, we absolutely do that. And in fact, we know that extroverts are much more often groomed for leadership positions than introverts are. And this isn't to say extroverts, of course, can be wonderful leaders, but there's also interesting new research by Adam Grant out of the Wharton School showing that in certain circumstances, introverts make the better leaders. And specifically, when you have employees who are really proactive and really engaged, they often do better with introverted leaders because those leaders let the proactive employees run with their ideas and implement them. Whereas an extroverted leader, almost without realizing what they're doing, maybe putting their own stamp on things and being more dominant so that the ideas of the employees may never actually come to light.
So tell me a little bit more about the sea change. How do you actually see this going into effect? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, it's a few things. I mean, the first thing I would like to change is people's psyches. So many of the introverts who I interviewed for my book, and many of the people, they don't appear introverted, but so many of them told me about a kind of secret sense of shame that they had about who they were and how they prefer to spend their time. So the first thing that I want to see changing is people's psyches, for people to have a comfort level with who they are. But then I'd also like schools and workplaces to really rethink how they are structured and to think about meeting the needs of their introverts as well as their extroverts.